Good afternoon, I'm Abraham.
And I'm Franklin. In this video, we will be adumbrating the second half of Chapter 1, New World Beginnings, in the Kennedy, Cohen, and Bailey American Pageant textbook. Abe, take it away.
Of course. So before we talk about our most famous explorer, Columbus, there were two important Portuguese explorers who preceded him. We had Bartholomew Diaz, who finally was the first to round the tip of Africa from Portugal. So we sailed all the way down and rounded the tip. After him, we had Vasco da Gama, who similarly rounded the tip of Africa, but this time made it all the way to India. Next up, we have Columbus. Now, Columbus was in a time where exploration was being fueled by various aspects of life. We had the Renaissance, which was had this ambitious spirit of optimism and adventure. So the feeling of exploration was definitely there. We had the printing press spreading scientific knowledge and the invention of the compass facilitating sea travel. So Columbus finally in 1492 persuades the co-monarchs Ferdinand and Isabella to fund his expedition to the Americas. However, he did misjudge the size of the Earth. He thought the Earth was 1/3 the size of what it actually was. So when he landed in the Americas in only 30 days, he thought, therefore, by that logic, I must have reached the Indies. So he called all the Native Americans Indians. Columbus's discovery had momentous effects. It joined the continents of the Americas and both the Americas and Africa and Europe together in trading. So basically what happened was Europe provided the market and the capital and the technology, of course. Africa provided the labor, the slaves, and the New World offered all of the raw materials. So we had kind of this trading triangle that we're going to talk more about later. So, Franklin, could you please elaborate? Could you tell me about this so-called Columbian exchange?
Well, of course. That was the basis of what you were talking about earlier, with that trading triangle. So a biological flip-flop occurs, kind of, between the New World, the two Americas, and the Old World, that of Europe. Germs, livestock, and plants move from Europe into the New World, and vice versa, sometimes to terrible effect. For example, we saw diseases such as smallpox, yellow fever, and malaria move from Europe into North America. The Native Americans there had no immunities built up to these diseases, and consequently died in the millions. However, on the bright side, we saw new crops being exchanged as part of this Columbian exchange. We saw corn, potatoes, tobacco, beans, peppers, pumpkin, squash. These all moved from the from the New World to the Old One. And from the Old One came sugarcane, apples, cabbage, and carrots going to America. Additionally, Europe brought new livestock, such as horses, pigs, and cows, to North and South America. Unfortunately, because of the lack of immunities that the Native Americans had, within 10 years of the Columbian exchange's beginnings, 90% of them had perished due to malaria, typhoid, and smallpox.
Yes, so Columbus's exchange definitely did have momentous effects, but Columbus was not the only one that traveled to the Americas.
So, as the Europeans realized that trade could be lucrative between the New World and the Old One, Sean, did they expand? Did more ones follow in their wake?
Yes, we had the rise of the conquistadors. Preceding the conquistadors a little bit was what we know as the Treaty of Tordesillas between Spain and Portugal. Basically what it did, it shot a line up through the middle of present-day Brazil and gave Portugal everything to the right of the line and Spain everything to the left of the line, basically east and west, respectively. So Spain became, of course, the dominant power in the Americas after that and sent its series of conquistadors, the first of which was Balboa, who discovered the Pacific Ocean and then after that claimed the area around Panama for the Spanish crown. After Balboa, we had Ferdinand Magellan, who was the first, his fleet was the first to circumnavigate the globe. They went all the way around. After Magellan, we had Ponce de Leon, or however you pronounce his name, who explored Florida and was looking for the legendary so-called Fountain of Youth that he wanted to find, of course. And then we had Coronado after him, who started from about the Arizona area and explored all the way to Kansas looking for the legendary El Dorado. And he also was the first to find the Pueblo Indians. After Coronado, we had De Soto, who discovered the Mississippi River and was later killed there. He did not like the Indians. He treated the Indians very poorly, and they did not take well to that.
They returned the favor.
Yes. Okay, after that, we had Pizarro, one of the most important ones, one of the most important conquistadors who conquered the Inca Empire in Peru, and then shipped tons of gold and silver back to Spain from Potosi, the mines there. And this had also momentous effects. It caused an inflation in Spain, which did lead to the development of capitalism. Basically what happened was, with all this new gold and silver, it encouraged much more trading, and all the merchants were trading more, and there was a lot more commerce going on. So those were the conquistadors. A last note. When Spain was conquering the Americas, they used the islands of the Caribbean Sea as sort of their offshore bases. They were storing supplies there, resting their horses, and those native communities on those offshore islands of the Caribbean, the West Indies, also served as kind of a test. They were vulnerable, so they were like laboratories for testing the techniques that the Spanish would later use to conquer the more powerful Incas and Aztecs in that sense. So after the conquistadors captured the native people, they used the encomienda system to control them. Basically what it was Indians would be commended to certain colonists by the government, and with the promise to convert them to Christianity. But basically it was just a form of slavery, and the Indians didn't like it. And Bartolomé de las Casas was one of the most avid rebels against the encomienda system. So, Franklin, could you tell me about the conquest of Mexico?
The conquest of Mexico. This is one of the most important aspects of the conquest of the New World by the Europeans, as in Mexico at that time, we saw the massive Aztec Empire, controlled by their king, Montezuma. Now, Hernando Cortés was a conquistador from Spain, similar to Pizarro, and he arrived to conquer this Aztec Empire at their capital in Tenochtitlan. Cortés went from Cuba... Tenochtitlan. Cortés came from Cuba to present-day Veracruz and then marched over the mountains to the Aztec capital. Now Montezuma, the Aztec king, thought Cortés might be the god Quetzalcoatl, who was due to return... That's how you pronounce it. Quetzalcoatl, who was due to return that very year. So Montezuma welcomed Cortés into his capital with open arms. The Spanish lust for gold then led Montezuma to attack on the Noche Triste, or sad night. Cortés and his men fought their way out, but it was smallpox that eventually beat the Aztecs, as their numbers were so reduced by the disease. The Spanish then destroyed Tenochtitlan, building the Spanish capital, today known as Mexico City, exactly on top of the ancient Aztec city. And a new race of people began to emerge in its wake, known as the Creoles, or Mestizos, a mix of Spanish and Indian. We discussed how the Spanish took control of South America through the use of the conquistador Pizarro. And we discussed how Cortés took control of Mexico. Mm-hmm. But how did the Spanish bring North America, or the present-day U.S., under their control?
I love this question. What the Spanish did was they started the series of missions in which, on the North America borderlands, of course, to convert the Indians to Christianity. They also established, notably, a fort at St. Augustine in Florida, which, for the purpose of blocking the French ambitions and protecting the sea lanes that were going by into the Caribbean. They sent Don Juan de Onate, who took a similar path as Coronado had done years earlier, starting in Arizona to Kansas, and Don Juan led the Spaniards against the Indians in the Battle of Acoma, where he butchered the Indians and cut off the leg of all these survivors. Now, as the Spanish were suppressing these religious customs of the Indians and forcing Christianity upon them, the Indians did not like that, and they provoked the Popes Rebellion, in which they were fighting for their rights. The Indians destroyed all the Catholic churches and killed a bunch of priests, and then they rebuilt their kiva, which is basically this ceremonial religious chamber that Cortés had destroyed, he had destroyed with the Aztec temples. So, Frank, could you tell me about the other European powers that attempted to settle in the New World?
Absolutely. The two main ones were France and England. France sent their explorer, De Salle, all the way to the Mississippi River, and then he named the area around the Mississippi Louisiana, after King Louis of France. And England sent John Cabot, who was aiming for Brazil, and yet went drastically off course until he reached what is now known as Canada, 5,000 miles off course. So still
quite an embarrassing blunder.
Quite a bad start for exploration for the English, although as we'll see in the coming chapter, they get more into the game. But what we're seeing here is that at this point, there's still a Spanish monopoly on gold, slaves, and products that are coming from the New World back to the Old One. However, among all the European powers that tried to conquer the New World, there were similar results to the native people. The spread of disease wiped out 90% of them, as I mentioned earlier, through malaria and smallpox. However, there were good things too. Remember, as I said earlier, that new products were brought from the New World to the Old One, and vice versa. Horses were brought to the New World for the first time, allowing faster transportation. And this kind of goes against what is known as the Black Legend. The Black Legend was the notion that the Spaniards, the Europeans in general, only brought bad things such as murder, disease, and slavery. And though that's true, they also brought good things such as law systems, architecture, Christianity, language, civilization. So the Black Legend is really only partly true, and not true in its entirety. Thank you. Please like, comment, and subscribe, and tune in next time for another synopsis of the American Pageant.
See you guys there.